We want to help you be the very best missionary so that you can give your very best to the people you're serving. What makes this podcast unique is it's done by missionaries for missionaries. How can we take timeless principles and apply them to our lives as missionaries? That's really our heart behind this. Welcome to this episode of the Modern Day Missionaries podcast. Today, we're so happy to have with us Mark and Julie Morgenstern. And Mark and Julie are the founders and the directors of Grow to Serve, which is an organization that exists to connect missionaries and ministers to quality and transformative learning, which results in healthy spiritual lives and fruitful ministry. And they're also former missionaries, which is really what fuels their passion to serve those on the field. And Mark and Julie, you have curated and created excellent resources for missionaries. And I just feel so excited for everybody who's listening to get to connect them with these resources, because I know that's what you guys are all about. That's what I'm all about. What we're about at Modern Day is connecting people with resources that are going to help them be healthy on the field and help them grow. You know, I think that's why we all just like each other so much. We are so on the same page with this. Yeah. I was thinking back, we were talking about when we first met, and it was at a conference last year for people who work in the missions space. And Mark and Julie, you guys were hosting it, and you were so much fun that I remember the second day of the conference just walking up to you, Julie. It was right before we were getting breakfast, and I just said, "Hey, can I have breakfast with you?" And we sat down and had the best conversation. And that's what all started. So I'm so excited for everybody listening that you get to meet Mark and Julie. Maybe you're having breakfast with them, drinking your coffee this morning. And we're going to be talking with them about the importance of investing in yourselves through purposeful, ongoing learning. So get ready to take some notes. But first, Mark and Julie, I want to ask you guys a few fun questions so everybody can get to know you for the fantastic people that you are. Okay. So you guys ready for this? All right, I know you're ready.
So much
you guys are fun.
Confidence in us of how fantastic we are. That's exciting.
I do. I've talked to you. I've heard you speak. My confidence is like all the way. All right. Okay, we'll start super easy. What are the countries you have lived in? I know you got this.
Okay, so we grew up in California, so it was a very diverse environment there, and we loved it, and it just was part of who we are.
Kind of its own country.
In Central California. And then we lived in Russia for a year, and that was right when the Soviet Union was breaking up. So it was a crazy time and a very interesting time, and people were so hungry for spiritual things. And then we took a little break, and then we served for 12 years in Ukraine. And we helped start churches there, and we helped get Ukrainians and other Americans and being church planters and pastors and missionaries.
3 countries.
Yep,
wow.
3 countries.
I would have said it
That's
like 3 countries.
Okay.
Your answer was way better.
It was. It gave some context, which I love. Okay, here's another one. What is one food that you eat now that you would not eat when you were growing up?
Oh. Well, my first thought is borscht.
Yeah.
Because the idea of eating beets, because it was only pickled beets that my mother served me, and I never knew you could just have cooked beets that turned soup in this beautiful color, and then living in Russia and Ukraine, now that's our Thanksgiving. Well, we do have turkey, but the day after Thanksgiving, it's a family project to create borscht together.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, how fun
way you get
is
your
that?
boys to eat vegetables.
And they love it because when they were
Yes.
in preschool in Ukraine, they had it for lunch every day practically. So
Yeah.
it's
So
like
they grew up
old
loving
home.
beets. I didn't. And so now as an adult, borscht.
Isn't that funny? So same thing. We did not grow up eating beets at all. I don't know, I guess, how many Americans do. I'm sure there are some do, but we didn't. But in Peru, you go out for chicken all the time, these rotisserie chickens, and they serve beets as part of a cooked salad all the time. So same thing, went from eating no beets to eating beets all the time. And we're huge fans.
Yeah.
Like, if you haven't tried beets,
That's
you are
right.
missing out. You got to
Hot,
try some beets
cold,
today. That's the
anything
message.
Spicy beets. Ooh, shredded spicy beets. Yum. Yep.
Yes. Okay, there's point one of your notes today.
Try
Try
some
some
beets.
beets. Some people are already tuning out. Hang with us. We got more good stuff coming. How about you, Mark? Is there anything that you now eat?
Well, now I eat a little bit of eggplant, but that's because of my wife's influence. But not
No.
really a fan of it, or wasn't really. And now, if you put enough stuff on it, then
Yeah.
I guess then
It's really
okay.
not my influence. It's the mozzarella
Yeah.
influence.
Mozzarella's good.
Oh, so you eat it
Yes.
for the cheese,
Yes.
is what you're saying.
Absolutely.
Okay, that's fair. It's probably the only way I could eat it too. It's not my fave. Not my fave. Okay, what is an irrational fear you have?
Goodness. How much time do you have? Mark, you go first.
No, you got lots of them. Go ahead.
What's an irrational? I mean, I have so many irrational fears. Let me just say, I have a great imagination. So one time sitting in a baseball stadium, I watched a whole mass of people, police running, and I'm sure it was just a guy that had drank too much beer. I'm sure. But I had decided it was a terrorist. And I was going through in my head, Mark, I think we need to go home because at least one of us needs to go home. It's a really good game, so you can stay, and I'll go home because our children need a parent.
Okay.
There's my irrational fear.
Yes.
One of my many.
Mine,
You?
yeah.
Thank you for
Mine's probably a
sharing.
lot more-
Just getting real from the beginning.
Mine's probably a lot more personal, like that people won't like me. It's all the time. We meet lots of people all along the way, and generally speaking, I connect with people really well. But I just constantly have this thing of, they'll think I'm weird, or so maybe it's my inner junior higher coming out or something.
That is irrational.
Yeah.
People like you. I like you.
I echo Julie. You are easy to like. So, yep, it is irrational. It definitely fits in that category. Okay, here's one for each other. Okay, Mark, you describe Julie using 3 words, and Julie, you describe Mark using 3 words.
Okay, so Julie is
Who wants to go first?
responsible, loving, and capable.
Wow.
Nice.
Responsible, loving, capable. Let's see, Mark. He's kind. That was the first word that I thought of. He's kind. He's a one word. So I have to think one word. A starter. He's a starter. And he's smart.
Wow,
Ooh.
nice.
You guys feeling really good about
Yeah.
each other right now? I mean, do
Yeah,
you
we
need a moment?
We're good.
That was awesome. I love that. Okay, and then our last question is, especially in light of talking about ongoing learning today, what is one book that you're either reading right now or have recently read that's made an impact on you?
So I read all the time. So I'm just going to say the book I'm reading right now is Have Peace by Jake Huffman. And I found out he's my neighbor. It's an interesting story of how I got the book from my son who was washing his windows. And he handed the book to my son and he brought it home. And it's an awesome book. Have Peace by Jake Huffman. He's a retired pastor.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Awesome. How about
I
you, Mark?
just read a book about we celebrate Passover every year with our family, and so I just read a book. There's this, you have this book that guides you through the process of having a Passover celebration. It's called a Haggadah. So I bought this beautiful Haggadah, and in the back it had like the commentary that told all about like what is a Haggadah and what are the history and how Jewish people in the celebration of the holiday, you bring in current realities that are, current things that are hanging over us in the world, and how that's been, for thousands of years, that kind of a tradition. So it was really cool to think about our own celebration of Passover as a family, and then how we do that or don't do that on an appropriate level. So that was fun.
Wow, that sounds
Yeah.
fascinating. Yeah. Okay, so now we're
Okay.
all warmed up. So now we're just jumping straight on in. Why don't you guys give us just a quick little background as to how you became missionaries, and then I'd love to hear a bit about Grow to Serve, which is the organization that you guys have founded and are directors of, and how you serve ministries, or I shouldn't say ministries, how you serve missionaries.
I'll give a little background. Mark and I grew up together in California, Central California, at the same church. We were 7 and 8 years old when we met. We just loved growing up at this church. It was a missions-minded church. It was a church that taught about spiritual giftings. It was a church that always said we serve a global God. And so from the time we were young, we just thought missions was just a part of our lives and that understanding. And then it was a part of, well, who are we going to become? What gifting, strengths has God put in us? So when Mark was 14, he really felt a call to missions. And it was through a little film strip while he was, I think, serving at a vacation Bible club. And it was about bush pilots, and missionary aviation. And when we started dating, when we were 15 and 16, it was because we were on a mission trip in Mexico together as high schoolers. And we both thought the other was like, wow, they're serious about their faith. And wow, let's spend time together. And so we did. And on our first date, he told me, I'm going to be a missionary. And I said, good for you. Because I thought this is only a first date. I had not thought about missions in that I would be one of those supporters and prayer warriors. And so then over 6 years of dating, God moved in both of our hearts and focused us into the same plan and the same goal. And we went off to school for him to be trained as a missionary pilot, which then God took us on many other journeys and twists and turns since that time. But that was our calling.
Wow. That's fascinating. And then to even add a little bit more fascinating, I know, Mark, I was reading that your grandparents, I believe, survived the Holocaust. They were Jewish survivors of the Holocaust and came to the U.S. and converted to Christianity.
Yeah, it's
Is
a
that
great
right?
story. My grandparents spoke German, and they came, and there were these refugees. And in our community, in the community where they lived, they met some farmers as they were doing business that were Mennonite Christians that spoke German, and they just befriended this Jewish family and were kind to them, and over time talked about Jesus, and they became followers of Jesus. So it started a whole clan of us that are very serious about our faith and serving, and it was because of one family that reached out to somebody that they probably thought, oh, they're not going to be interested, they're Jewish, but they did.
Wow, that is fascinating. And then here you guys end up becoming missionaries to another country. So
Yep.
what a wild legacy. And then so you mentioned you were in Russia. Was it for a year and a half, you said? And then 12 years in Ukraine?
So we were in a year in Russia. We were actually in this pilot program. We were this pioneer group. And many of your listeners might have heard of Co-Mission. At one time, there was about 12,000 school teachers from the United States that have been sent over with Co-Mission, which is a conglomeration of all sorts of ministries put together. And it was a moment in time when the Soviet Union broke up, that the Minister of Education said, we need something in our schools to teach our people to be good citizens. Well, why don't we look at America? And so they were setting off having a curriculum that was based on the Bible in their civics classes. And so Mark and I got to do that. We were that first team to pilot this program of training up teachers in the public school systems in Moscow. That's where we were. And then that's what changed the course. We went from being bush pilots to we're just doing this for a year to, oh my, there are people in this country that need to hear about Jesus, and we want to be teaching them that. So that's what changed us over to church planners in Ukraine.
Is that ever cool? And then you were there 12 years, which is a super long time, and then came back and got involved on the other side of things, serving missionaries. Talk a little bit about that transition.
Yeah, I think our organization saw our heart that we just were really passionate about developing other people constantly. So that whether that was Ukrainians or other Americans or whoever, so they were ready to revamp kind of the way we were doing our training for our missionaries in our organization. So they asked us to come to Minnesota to the headquarters and serve. So we gave got the opportunity. I served as the training director for 9 years, and we had a lot of input into people's getting ready for missionary service. Julie was the pre-field training director, and then we also started to innovate using distance learning and having people learn in groups when they're spread out all over the world, so that missionaries could have ongoing learning. And as we did more and more of that, we started to connect with more and more other organizations that we could serve rather than just one. So we had the opportunity to spin out this part of the ministry that we do now. It started inside of our organization and spun out to be able to be something that could serve a much broader audience.
And share a little bit about the impact that you've seen ongoing learning have on missionaries.
Well, I think it started back on when we were doing this pre-field training, and we were front loading all the learning. And then we were thinking back on our own time and how we had been front loaded with all of this learning. And then after studying Russian for 2 years, and then we're jumping into ministry, we're like, oh, we don't remember what anyone told us. Or we start to go through some culture shock after a few years. We go, what are we supposed to do with this?
Someone must have talked to us about this, but we can't really remember.
We can't really remember. Now, obviously, this was before the internet, and it was just coming in when we were overseas. And so we started to dream about what that would look like. And so now, during those 9 years when I was doing pre-field training, I started to dream about, okay, telling the people there, this is just the beginning of your learning, because you're going to go overseas and you're going to be hit, because you can only imagine what life is like over there. So how do you prepare for that? But when you're in the middle of it, in the context of ministry and life, you got to start. You can't sit there not learning. It's almost a drive to learn. And so we want to really talk about that you are learning. Let's get some intention to it, because we are learning as we move through life. Mm-hmm. It's a part of our existence as believers, right? It's part of discipling, that there's a process of learning all along the way.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. As you're talking, it makes me think of how, like, when you're going to get married, you read all the books on marriage, and you just, everything you can get your hands on, and maybe those first few months. And then not doing ongoing learning in marriage, imagine what that would be if you never picked up another marriage book, if you never went to another marriage conference, if you never learned how to communicate better. It's the same with missions or any area of life. You want to learn beforehand. Absolutely. The energy is high. You're excited. But then things just make a lot more sense. I mean, when you read a marriage book when you've been married 5 years versus beforehand, there's just stuff that you see and hear. It's totally different.
Absolutely. We sometimes talk about just-in-case learning versus just-in-time learning. And trainers just love to do just-in-case learning, because they want to give you everything that you might ever need, just in case you ever need this. And especially if you're super excited about the topic, as the trainer, you want everyone else to be excited about it too. Mm-hmm. But people just don't have the capacity they don't have the hooks to hang it on. So a person's imagining what their future service and life in this other place is going to be like. So they're hanging it on even fictitious hooks in their mind and in their understanding. And we're like, if they could come back to us a year later, 2 years later, when they're in a real situation and they're like, I know that I'm falling short of my perception here of what's going on. How can I kind of upskill myself at that moment?
Right.
It's just so much more powerful. Your motivation's there, your ability to remember it, your ability to put it into practice right away is super, super powerful.
Mm-hmm.
What a great way of explaining it. So now, you guys were talking about when you first came off the field and started putting this together, there wasn't a lot of resources that were easily accessible out there. It was very little to choose from. Question for you guys. Now we are living in this world where it's almost information overload. Not almost, it is information overload. So for missionaries who are looking at investing in ongoing learning, and they're presented with just like a sea of information, how do they even know where to start? Where should they begin?
Yeah, I mean, that's one of the things we began trying to figure out a way to answer that question about probably 7-8 years ago, and that was part of what prompted us to start this thing called missiontools.org. And we basically created a website that's like an Amazon marketplace of missionary learning. So it's sourced from a bunch of different people. It's amazing how many cool things organizations have on their sites, they have blog series, they have articles they've written, they have books that people within their organization have written, and it's there on people's site, but unless you know where to go to get it, you wouldn't even know it's there. So we created a place where you could come and search and find a lot of different kinds of things, blogs and videos and courses and book reviews, all in one place. So that was part of it. I think one of the things I'd encourage people is start with your own organization. Sometimes that's one of the things you maybe hear about at the beginning and it's a blur, you don't remember it, is that, oh yeah, we have this in-house university, or we have this resource library of things. Start with your own organization and see what's there that you might want to avail yourself of. But also it's really powerful to have some kind of a coach or mentor in your life that you're talking through particular situations, and then as they could direct you towards particular learning resources that they know about that could be helpful. So that could be your supervisor or a mentor or a coach or somebody that's a pastor for you, a member care person or something. Really avail yourself of those people.
Yeah. Okay. So starting with a mentor, starting with your organization, and then also availing yourselves of the missions toolbox and kind of searching in there as to what's available. And it sounds like that's a site that's been curated with a bunch of different missions resources kind of all in the same place.
And we don't necessarily look at every single resource and say, is this one good or not? Because sometimes people have different opinions on things, and that's fine. But we know that it's organizations that are really quality organizations, and we know what they're all about, what their values are as an organization. So we kind of vet the organization and then see what they're putting out.
Yeah, and what would you say to missionaries who just feel kind of overworked, overstretched right now, and they are struggling to find time to do ongoing learning in the midst of all of the things they have going on?
I love that question. It's a hard one because it really is true. You're stretched in the directions of all the different things of just life that are new or different or constantly changing. And then on top of that, you're trying to be faithful in what God's brought you there to do, and it's through a lot of relationships, usually ministry, and relationships take time. So it is true. I think one of the strongest things that I've resolved is that you need to make two things in your life that you decide this is work. Even though it might seem extra to your work, you need to say, no, it is part of my work. And so when I'm doing it, I can give myself permission to say, I'm not like cheating my work by doing this. I'm actually doing my work by doing that. And the first one is prayer. So as a person it should be true for all of us, but if you're in ministry, you should never be apologizing to yourself that I'm spending time praying and I should be doing my ministry. It is your ministry, right. And it has this multiplicative effect when you pray. So, and it's the same exact thing for learning. I think anything you invest in learning, it means that you're putting it in the bank for the future or for today for fruitfulness of what you do. So I think if you can get to the place of, I budget time for learning in my work as part of my work rather than in addition to my work, it's really powerful. Stephen Covey, and kind of like that kind of classic self-management book of 7 Habits of Highly Effective People back in the 90s, one of the things he talked about was that there's 2 kinds of work that we do. There's production work, but there's also production capacity work. So when you do work that's actually investing in your capacity to do work, so that's like sharpening the saw, or picking up the trash as you work rather than waiting to the end. When you do those production capacity things, then the other work you do will be much more fruitful. So it's the same thing with learning. That's one of the strongest capacity building things is when you invest in learning.
Let me just share a testimony, because I was raising our 4 sons overseas. And I felt Mark was this preacher of lifelong learning. So I felt like it was just another thing I had to put on myself. And I was going, I'm learning Russian. We're church planning. I got 4 boys. They're in Russian schools. We're just like, ah. And so I really sensed that I just couldn't add something else to my day. But I started to realize that part of me being a missionary is being curious. And I was all about curiosity. I was curious about why Ukrainians did certain things certain ways. I was curious about my neighbors. I was curious about my friends. And, I was just, and that's something that is just innate in women. So maybe this helps, that curiosity. But when I started to really look at that, that drove me to be like eagerly admitting my ignorance. That's really what curiosity is just eagerly and willingly admitting my ignorance of knowing. And for us as missionaries, we need to be curious. We need to be wanting to know these people. We want to know God more. There's this curiosity that should be driving us. It also, the added benefit is if I'm like saying, admitting my ignorance, that's a humble state. We talk about that. Missionaries, the biggest issue for us as missionaries is humility, I think, especially as North Americans. And that just helps you say, yeah, I don't know. I don't know. And there's always more to learn. And so if you put yourself in that state of curiosity, learning becomes much more of a gift than a task or a duty or a have to. You learn as you go through the day. And did I learn differently as a mom of 4 boys, and all the other things I had to do and juggle? Sure.
Yeah.
I learned differently than what Mark was learning.
Yeah, open up your horizons of what constitutes learning. We might think, I need to be investing in learning, and you have a very narrow perception of, I need to take a course or I need to read a book. We're all different, and so the ways we learn are different. So you could just say, I'm going to learn, but that means I'm going to be more purposeful in some of my conversations I'm having with my colleagues or my neighbors. Or it could be, I'm more purposeful in choosing what I'm reading, or I'm more purposeful in how I'm just, for fun, I kind of just wander around the internet. If that's what kind of person you are, well, just do it with a little bit more purposefulness. And if that's your style of learning, then use it. So I think that sometimes we narrow, that doesn't really count. I think one conversation we remembered as we were getting ready to talk about this was a time when Julie was at a kind of a breaking point where she was like frustrated with being in Ukraine. Like, this is so hard. Why are we here? And through a conversation...
It was a funk. I wanted to move home. I thought I could leave him there and take the kids home, and it would be much better. It was a lie.
But the learning journey was a conversation between the two of us, and maybe bringing up some things we already knew, just bringing them to bear in that situation, in that moment. And what we talked about was, well, if you could do at least one thing a week out in the community that reminds you of how cool it is that we're here and why we're here. And so when we just together, we changed the family organization budget of, how we use our time and everything, to say, we're going to make it happen for you to be out doing this one thing a week to re-energize you. That was a learning moment to remember that and then do something about it. And it was through a conversation between the two of us.
Yeah. Yeah.
This is so good. So you've validated learning as something that is a part of what we do. So for people who are wanting to learn but who don't have the time, it is a part of what you do. It's not, as you said, Mark, an extra or a bonus. It's valid. It's important. It's good. It's necessary. It's thinking more long term. I love what you said about Stephen Covey. It makes me think, too, of his urgent, important boxes as well. Sometimes as missionaries, we can be running after the urgent, and we forget the important, and that's an investment in the important. And then, Julie, as you were saying, remembering that it's fun, like just changing that mindset switch and going, I'm just going to chase after what grabs my attention. I'm just going to see what piques my interest. And taking the limits off of what we think about learning, like it has to be a book or it has to be a course. Like you said, just kind of waking up and saying, what do I want to learn more about? In humility, what do I want to learn more about? What would benefit me and those around me? And what sounds fun? And just chasing after what that is. I love even that you brought up conversations with other people. It doesn't have to be a course. It can be like, I want to know more about this particular area of culture. So I'm going to talk to 5 people this week and ask them their opinion on this. That is learning. I mean, for people listening to this podcast right now, they are learning. Give yourself a hand clap right now. All of you who are learning, you're investing in learning. We applaud you. But it is. We put limits on it when in reality there are so many ways to do it. This is so great what you guys are saying. I think this is liberating. I'm hoping this is setting some people free. And I'm curious for them what they're feeling curious about as they're listening. What do you want to know about? And what is a fun way that you could dig into that? Oh,
Yeah,
my goodness.
one thing that I would add into the
This is
mix
awesome.
is that real learning's always about change. And our journey as disciples is a journey of change. We walk with Jesus, and if you walk with Jesus, that means you're not standing still. You're not, you're going forward. I think with the Pharisees, what happened with them is they collected, until they were like, okay, now I know it all. And when you stop learning, because now you know it all, then you start eventually just taking what you know and start using it just for your own advantage. You don't really glorify God with it. You monopolize it for yourself. So to really learn and grow and change, it always implies change. So even if somebody's like watching the podcast, like, I just really enjoy watching this, well, turn it into a learning moment by setting, okay, so what am I going to go out and do differently now in light of what I maybe set something, a goal for as a result of watching the podcast. It might be, oh, I want to share what I learned with one other person. I want to talk about it with my spouse, or I want to talk about it with my team. That could be your learning step and your change step, that you're influencing someone else. Or I'm going to change this thing in my schedule as in light of what I heard today. Then it's more than just entertainment or gathering information. It's actually learning, because you're actually changing.
What an important point, because if we are learning just for learning's sake and we're not doing anything with it, we just become know-it-alls or gluttons for information. I've got myself in those seasons, I'm not going to lie, where I've just been like, how many books can I read? And I want more and more and more and more and more, without pausing to think, what is this book doing on the inside of me, and how can I live differently as a result? So taking that learning and moving it into the action phase is so critical. So thanks for making sure that you mentioned that as well. I think that's really important. And as we wrap things up, I want you guys just to mention, we talked about the missions toolbox. Is it .org?
Missiontools.org.
missiontools.org, and we'll put a link to those in the resources where people can begin their learning journey if they want to find out more. And then what are some other things that you guys would like to mention?
I would like to say, so the same, missiontools.org, is it /calendar?
growtoserve.com/calendar.
Or you can go to the missiontools.org and then choose calendar. But that shows you about some of these cohort courses. And why I say this is because I think we do learn best in community. And it is especially fun to learn best with other missionaries that are in the same, place in life. But it doesn't necessarily mean they have to be in the same country, because it is an online asynchronous courses that are on different topics. And so what we've found is that people, they find their tribe in taking these courses on certain topics. And they also figure out, especially if they're at a hard point in their life and their journey on the field, they find out they're not alone, that their thoughts and their worries and their anxieties are no different than the other missionary across the world. And there's a lot of comfort in that. And then there's a lot of learning that goes along in that as well.
Absolutely. And if you have never heard the word asynchronous, it just means that you can log on at any time and take it at your own pace. You don't have to be live in class.
And it allows people like in Asia to go in first and write their responses. And then somebody in Peru comes on in and goes, oh, look what Lee did. And they write to them. And so it's a fun interaction in a 24-hour time periods that kind of move along.
Oh, that is so cool. And I also want to mention, for people who are anywhere near Minnesota, coming up in
February.
February
23rd and 24th.
You guys want to talk about it?
Yeah, there's a conference that we met Stephanie at that is called Midwest Care Connection. And it's really for people from churches, people from organizations that are wanting to care for missionaries well and upskill themselves in the area of being a caring supporter. And so we have some exciting plenary speakers. We have a bunch of workshops on different topics. We're going to be talking about a growingly diverse community of global workers that come from all over the world and do all kinds of different kinds of ministry, and they finance it all different kinds of ways. So it's getting really diverse in what these missionaries and global workers look like. So how do we care for this super diverse group of people too. And that's what we'll be talking about in February.
Registration opens October 1st. How would they register?
Yeah, and it's mc2.global.
Easy. Plus, you guys are hosting, so I mean, I'm going to be there. You guys are going to be there.
What more?
reason do
You
people
can meet
have?
us
They could come and
and
see
have
us.
breakfast with us.
Yes, exactly, exactly. Well, Mark and Julie, thank you so much for all that you do for the body of Christ, for people in missions especially, and for coming on today to share. We just really appreciated it, and it was every bit as much fun as I knew it would be.
I'm glad. Thanks for inviting us.
Yes, we love to bless others, and thanks for the opportunity.
Yep.
Oh, I'm so glad. And for everyone else, we look forward to seeing you on our next episode.